A woman causes chaos at a traffic stop, but the calm cop's next move shocks everyone. What happens in the end? You won't believe it. Stay till the last second. The late afternoon sun was sinking, painting the suburban streets with streaks of gold. Officer Marcus Reed sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, tired but focused, counting down the minutes until the end of his shift. Just one more hour. Just one more. Up ahead, a silver SUV cruised past. As it drove by, Marcus spotted the problem. A taillight flickering like it was ready to burn out. It wasn't a major violation, but rules were rules. He flicked on the patrol lights, signaling the SUV to pull over. The vehicle slowed, weaving slightly, and came to a stop by the curb. Marcus pulled in behind it, put the car in park, and adjusted his hat. Routine stop, he reminded himself. In and out, quick and smooth. He stepped out, the soft crunch of his boots meeting the pavement as he made his way toward the SUV. The driver's window rolled down halfway, and behind it sat a woman in her 40s with short, platinum blonde hair. She wore oversized sunglasses that perched on her nose, and her lips were pressed tight with irritation. Before Marcus could even greet her, she cut him off. "What now?" she snapped, rolling her eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't stay stuck. Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I noticed your right taillight isn't working. Could I see your license and registration, please?" She let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, tossing her hands in the air like he'd just told her she was under arrest. "You've got to be kidding me. A taillight, seriously?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his tone calm but polite. "It's a safety concern for you and other drivers." She folded her arms, glaring at him through the small gap in the window. "This is ridiculous. I know how you people operate." Her voice dripped with contempt, emphasizing the words, "you people," like they carried an extra weight. Marcus ignored the comment. "I just need your license and registration, ma'am. Then you can be on your way." The woman huffed again and grabbed her phone from the dashboard, swiping it open. "You know what? I'm recording this." She held the phone up toward him, her expression smug. Marcus gave her a short nod. "That's fine, ma'am. You have every right to record." She smirked, clearly expecting him to react differently. "You hear that, folks? Officer Marcus Reed, pulling me over for no reason," she said into the phone, raising her voice for dramatic effect. "Let's see how fast this goes viral." Marcus stayed still, his hands at his sides, keeping his posture relaxed. He had dealt with this before, people hoping to provoke a reaction, baiting him into making a mistake. But he wasn't going to give her what she wanted. "Ma'am, the only reason I stopped you is because of your taillight. If you provide your license and registration, we'll be done here." She leaned further out the window, sunglasses sliding down her nose. "Oh, I know what this is. You saw a white woman driving and thought you'd have some fun." Marcus took a slow breath, keeping his voice steady. "No, ma'am. I pulled you over because of the tail light, that's it." But she wasn't listening. "You people are all the same," she muttered, her voice dripping with venom. "Looking for any excuse to mess with someone." Marcus glanced down the road. A few pedestrians had slowed to watch, curiosity written across their faces. Some of them had already pulled out their phones, recording quietly from a distance. The pressure was building. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his tone still calm, "I need you to cooperate. This doesn't have to take long." She smirked again, tilting her head in mock amusement. "Oh, I bet you'd love that, wouldn't you? Just write me a ticket and feel all big and powerful." Marcus resisted the urge to sigh. "I'd just like to get this over with, ma'am." But the woman, Karen as Marcus would later learn, wasn't ready to let it go. "Not until I talk to your supervisor," she said smugly, settling back into her seat. "I know my rights." Marcus gave her a polite, professional nod. "You can request a supervisor after you provide your information, ma'am." Karen's smile widened, like she thought she'd just scored a point. "You really think you can bully me, huh? Well, I've got news for you. That badge doesn't mean you get to treat people like dirt." Marcus stayed patient, though he could feel the tension growing. Every second that passed felt like another step closer to disaster. "Ma'am, please," he said, his voice still even but firmer now. "I need your license and registration. If you refuse, I'll have to ask you to step out of the vehicle." Karen's eyes sparkled with satisfaction, like this was exactly what she wanted. "Oh, I'd love to see you try," she whispered, her tone thick with sarcasm. Marcus kept his gaze steady. He knew this wasn't just about a broken taillight anymore. Karen wanted a confrontation, and she wasn't going to back down. The street felt heavy with silence, the onlookers waiting for something to happen. Marcus knew how fragile moments like this were, how easily they could spiral out of control. But he wasn't going to let that happen. Not today. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his tone measured, "I'm giving you one last chance to cooperate." Karen crossed her arms and grinned. "Go ahead, officer. Let's see what you've got." Marcus stood still, hands at his sides, his patience holding steady. But in his mind, he knew. This was only the beginning. The air felt thick as Marcus stood quietly by the car, his calm gaze meeting Karen's smug smile. She thought she had him cornered, thought her phone was a weapon that would keep her untouchable. The onlookers, still gathering at a distance, waited in silent anticipation, their phones ready to capture the moment things went wrong. Marcus kept his stance relaxed. No sudden moves, no raised voice. He knew how fragile moments like these were. "Ma'am, please step out of the vehicle," Marcus said, his tone steady and measured. Karen leaned against the window frame, her arms crossed over her chest. "You're really doing this? For a taillight?" She scoffed dramatically. "This is harassment." Marcus remained polite. "This will go smoother if you cooperate." Karen tilted her head, her smirk widening. "Smoother for who exactly? You think I don't know what you're doing? I know exactly how this works." Her phone stayed trained on him, recording every second. "Let's see how many views this gets," she muttered, half to herself, adjusting the camera angle. "Hope you're ready to be famous, Officer Reed." Marcus gave her another moment to comply, hoping she might reconsider. But Karen wasn't backing down. She had come too far and wasn't about to let this end quietly. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," Marcus repeated, firmer now. "This is your final warning." Karen rolled her eyes but finally unbuckled her seatbelt. "Fine. You want to play tough? Let's play." She threw the door open with a dramatic swing and stepped out onto the pavement, still holding her phone in front of her like a shield. "Careful, officer," she said, sarcasm thick in her voice. "Wouldn't want anyone to think you're using excessive force." Marcus took a step back, giving her space. "Thank you, ma'am. Please stand over here so we can continue." But Karen wasn't done. "What's the next step, Officer Reed?" she asked, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You going to frisk me? Handcuff me for driving with a broken taillight?" Marcus ignored the bait. "I just need your license and registration. If you provide them, we can move on." Karen let out another loud laugh. "Oh, I bet you'd love that. Just hand over my information so you can write me a ticket and get your little power trip." She glanced at the onlookers, feeding off their silent attention. This is what happens when you give people like him a badge. Marcus clenched his jaw but didn't respond. He knew engaging with her insults would only escalate things further. His job was to stay professional, no matter how hard she pushed. Karen took another step toward him, closing the gap between them. "So what now, officer? You gonna tell me to calm down? Or are you just waiting for an excuse to throw me on the ground?" Marcus took a slow breath, keeping his voice calm. "Ma'am, I'm not here to argue with you. I just need your cooperation." Karen sneered. "Cooperation? Please, that's code for do what I say or else." She turned her phone back to the crowd, her voice loud and dramatic. "You all see this? This is what they do. They stop you for no reason, and when you don't bow down, they try to intimidate you." The crowd murmured quietly. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure of whether to intervene or keep filming. Marcus could feel the tension building, the moment teetering on the edge of chaos. "Ma'am, this doesn't need to go any further," Marcus said evenly. "Let's get through this and you'll be on your way." Karen laughed bitterly. Oh, sure, that's exactly what you want. Just smile and obey, right? Marcus's patience was wearing thin, but he kept his voice steady. I've given you multiple chances to cooperate. If you continue to refuse, I'll have to take further action. Karen crossed her arms, daring him with her eyes. Oh, I'd love to see you try. Marcus glanced briefly at the crowd, aware that every eye was on him, waiting for a reaction. He knew the smallest mistake would be magnified, dissected, and replayed 1,000 times over. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Marcus said calmly, but firmly. Karen took another step toward him, her phone still recording. What's the matter, Officer Reed? Afraid someone might see you for what you really are? Marcus stared at her quietly, his expression calm and controlled. He had heard it all before. The insults, the baiting, the attempts to undermine his authority. But he had learned long ago that the only way to win these battles was to not play at all. Ma'am, Marcus said slowly, if you don't provide your information, I'll have to detain you. Karen's grin widened. Oh, this is good. You're really going to arrest me? For what? Not smiling enough? Marcus stood firm. For obstruction and refusal to comply with a lawful order. Karen turned toward the crowd again, her voice loud and mocking. Hear that, everyone? Officer Reed thinks he can arrest me for not playing along. Let's see what Twitter has to say about that. The crowd shifted uneasily, some people exchanging nervous glances. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus knew he was standing at a crossroads. One wrong move, and this could spiral into a disaster. He gave Karen one last look, hoping she might reconsider. But her eyes gleamed with defiance. She wasn't going to back down. Ma'am, Marcus said, taking a small step forward. You're under arrest. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Karen's expression flickered, just for a second, with something that almost looked like doubt, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by rage. You're going to regret this, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I swear you'll regret this. Marcus remained calm. Please turn around, ma'am. Karen stood still, her phone shaking slightly in her hand. For a moment it seemed like she might comply. But then, with a sudden burst of anger, she swung her arm toward Marcus, shoving him hard in the chest. The crowd gasped, and phones zoomed in, recording every second. Marcus staggered slightly but quickly regained his balance. His training kicked in, and he took a careful step back, keeping his hands visible. Ma'am, stop resisting, he said calmly, though his heart was pounding. Karen's face twisted with fury. You don't tell me what to do. Marcus knew the moment had arrived. There was no going back now. The shove had been weak, more a desperate push than a real threat. But it was enough. Marcus felt the shift instantly, the crowd gasping, phones zooming in, and Karen's face twisting with satisfaction as if she had just won. She stood there, breathing hard, daring him to respond. Marcus knew this was the moment she had been pushing for, waiting to see if he'd slip. Every instinct told him to act fast, but his training held him steady. No sudden moves. Stay calm. Ma'am, Marcus said slowly, his voice even. You've just assaulted an officer. I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. Karen's smile twisted into a sneer. Oh, you're really going to arrest me now? For that? You've got to be kidding. The crowd murmured in hushed tones, and Marcus could feel the weight of every camera pointed at him. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. It was a public spectacle, and every second counted. Turn around, ma'am, Marcus repeated, his voice firm but still calm. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Karen's phone was still in her hand, the screen glowing as her live stream continued. She held it up again, pointing it at Marcus's face like a weapon. Everyone watching this? This is what they do. One little push, and suddenly they're ready to drag you off in cuffs. Marcus stayed still, keeping his hands visible, his heart steady. He had been through worse than this, but the cameras made it feel different, like one misstep could erase everything he'd worked for. Ma'am, "You've left me no choice," Marcus said, taking a step forward. "You're under arrest for assault and obstruction. Turn around." Karen's smirk didn't fade. "Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you?" she spat, her voice sharp and filled with venom. "Go ahead. Arrest me. See what happens." Marcus took another step forward, reaching carefully for her arm. "Don't make this worse, ma'am." Karen jerked her arm away, staggering back a step. "Don't you touch me," she shouted, her voice shrill. "This is assault. Someone help me." The crowd stirred, some people exchanging nervous glances. A few muttered quietly, uncertain about what they were seeing. But no one stepped forward. They just stood there, phones in hand, recording every second. Marcus exhaled slowly, keeping his focus. "Ma'am, stop resisting," he said firmly. "This won't end the way you think it will." Karen's breathing quickened, her face flushed with anger. "I'm not resisting. You're the one harassing me." She twisted wildly, trying to shake him off as Marcus reached gently for her wrist. His grip was light but steady, enough to control her without hurting her. "Let go of me," Karen screamed, her voice cracking. "You'll regret this. I'll sue you. I'll ruin you." Marcus kept his grip steady, guiding her arm behind her back. "You need to calm down, ma'am. I don't want to hurt you." Karen twisted harder, her phone slipping from her grip and clattering to the ground. The live stream kept going, the screen flickering as comments poured in. "This is police brutality," Karen shouted, her voice hoarse with rage. "He's hurting me." The crowd shifted again, their murmurs growing louder. Marcus could feel the tension thick in the air, every second stretched out, heavy with the weight of potential disaster. "Ma'am, I need you to stop," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not here to hurt you." Karen thrashed wildly, kicking at the air. "You're hurting me right now. This is illegal. You'll lose your job for this." Marcus moved smoothly, bringing her other hand behind her back and securing the cuffs with a quiet click. "You're under arrest, ma'am," he said calmly. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Karen screamed louder, her voice raw and frantic. "This is assault. You'll pay for this." Marcus gently guided her toward the patrol car, the weight of the crowd's eyes pressing on him with every step. The onlookers whispered and filmed, their phones capturing every moment. As they reached the car, Marcus opened the back door and helped Karen inside, her screams echoing through the street. "You're going to regret this," she yelled, pounding on the window with her fists. "You'll be sorry." Marcus closed the door with a quiet thud, the sound cutting through the noise like a final punctuation mark. He stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, grounding himself. The crowd lingered for a few seconds longer, unsure if the show was over. Some slowly began to drift away, lowering their phones, while others stayed, recording until the very end. Marcus knew the videos would be online within minutes, dissected and judged by people far removed from the reality of the situation. But he had done everything by the book. He took a step back, glancing briefly at Karen through the window. She was still shouting, her fists pounding against the glass, but the fight was leaving her. Slowly but surely, she was beginning to realize that this wasn't going to end the way she had imagined. Marcus straightened his uniform, adjusting his badge with a steady hand. He could feel the tension easing, the weight of the moment lifting just slightly. He had done his job, calmly, professionally, without letting the pressure break him. But he knew this wasn't over. Karen's rage wasn't just going to disappear, and the crowd's videos would take on a life of their own online. There would be fallout, questions, and probably more accusations. But for now, the situation was under control. Marcus glanced around the street one last time before heading back to his car. The storm had passed, for now. The patrol car hummed quietly as Marcus sat behind the wheel, taking a moment to steady himself. Karen was still in the back seat, her anger rolling off her in waves. She kicked at the door, her voice hoarse from shouting. "You're finished. Do you hear me? I'll ruin you." Marcus exhaled slowly, gripping the wheel tighter. He knew this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't just let things go. The phone in her lap, still streaming live, buzzed with notifications. Comments poured in faster than she could read them. many of them now mocking her behavior. "Karen, you did this to yourself. This officer's a saint for staying calm through that. She just can't stop digging her own grave." Karen noticed the shift too. Her smugness faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of unease. She tapped the phone furiously, scrolling through the comments, her face growing redder with each one. "This is insane," she yelled, slamming her fists on the glass divider. "You're all going to pay for this." Marcus didn't respond. He'd done everything right, handled the situation by the book. Still, he knew the real test would come once they reached the station. The complaint calls, the social media outrage. Karen wouldn't stop until she'd made it everyone's problem. He flicked on the radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reed, en route to the station with one in custody." The radio crackled and the dispatcher's calm voice came through. "Copy that, Officer Reed. See you in 10. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. Karen was still glaring at him, her jaw tight, but there was a new layer beneath the anger now. Fear. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She leaned forward, her voice low and filled with venom. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're messing with. My husband will have you fired by morning." Marcus kept his eyes on the road, unbothered. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." Karen let out a bitter laugh. "Your job? You mean harassing innocent people?" "I stopped you for a broken taillight," Marcus reminded her, his voice calm but firm. "Everything that followed was your decision." Karen huffed, crossing her arms like a child denied dessert. "This isn't over," she muttered under her breath. "Not by a long shot." The station came into view, its bright lights glowing against the darkening sky. Marcus pulled into the lot and parked the car. He let out another breath, preparing himself for whatever came next. He stepped out and opened the back door. Karen twisted in her seat, trying to make it difficult for him to help her out. "Don't touch me," she barked. "I'll walk on my own." "Suit yourself," Marcus replied evenly, stepping back to give her space. Karen swung her legs out of the car and stood, her hands still cuffed behind her back. "This is police brutality," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the officers at the entrance to hear. Marcus stayed silent, walking beside her as they made their way into the station. Two officers at the front desk glanced up as they entered, exchanging quick looks. One of them, Officer Sanchez, gave Marcus a small nod. "Rough night?" Sanchez asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcus gave a tight smile. "You could say that." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. I've been treated worse at Starbucks." Marcus guided her toward the booking desk, where Sergeant Daniels was waiting. The sergeant looked from Karen to Marcus, his face unreadable. "Evening, Reed," Daniels said. "What's the story?" "Traffic stop for a broken taillight," Marcus replied. "She refused to cooperate and resisted arrest." Karen scoffed loudly. "Resisted? Are you kidding? I was standing up for my rights." Daniels gave her a look that could freeze water. "Uh-huh." Karen glared at him, but Daniels was immune to her attitude. He pulled out a clipboard and started filling out the booking form. "We'll get her processed. Anything else I need to know?" "No, sir," Marcus said. "Everything's in the report." Daniels nodded and handed Marcus a copy of the paperwork. "Good work, Reed. Go grab a coffee. I'll take it from here." Karen's eyes widened as Marcus turned to leave. "You can't just walk away. This isn't over." Marcus paused, glancing back at her one last time. "You're right, ma'am," he said quietly. "It's not over, but it's out of my hands now." Karen's face twisted with rage, but Marcus didn't wait for her response. He walked calmly toward the break room, the tension slowly lifting off his shoulders. As the door swung shut behind him, he could hear Karen still shouting in the background, her words growing more frantic by the second. But Marcus knew he had done the right thing. The storm wasn't over yet, but for now, it was behind him. Don't miss the shocking ending. What happens next will leave you speechless. Marcus sat in the break room, sipping his coffee in the quiet moment he had carved out for himself. He knew this peace wouldn't last long. Karen Miller wasn't the type to let things go quietly. Every minute that passed, Marcus could feel the weight of her threats lingering at the back of his mind. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the muffled sounds of the station, the buzz of radios, the shuffle of paperwork, and Karen's voice carrying faintly from the booking desk. "I want my lawyer," Karen demanded loudly, her tone dripping with entitlement. "And I want my phone. This is illegal." Marcus could picture the scene perfectly. Karen hurling accusations at Sergeant Daniels, the other officers ignoring her outbursts like seasoned pros. Daniels had seen it all before. Marcus knew his sergeant would handle her just fine, but Karen wasn't going to stop without a fight. A moment later, the door to the break room swung open, and Officer Sanchez poked his head in. "Hey, Reed," he said with a knowing grin. "You gotta come see this." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but Sanchez's expression was too amused to ignore. With a sigh, Marcus stood, taking his coffee with him. "What now?" Sanchez chuckled. "Karen's husband just called. He's already on his way down here." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Of course he is." Sanchez led Marcus back to the front desk, where Karen was still perched on the booking bench, glaring at everyone in sight. Her phone was confiscated, but that didn't stop her from trying to keep the upper hand. "You have no idea what kind of trouble you're in," she hissed at Daniels, who calmly filled out her booking form without looking up. "Your husband's on the way, ma'am," Daniels said flatly. "You can take it up with him when he gets here." Karen's expression flickered, just for a second, with what looked like doubt, but she quickly masked it with another sneer. "Good. He'll straighten this out, and you'll all be in big trouble." Marcus leaned against the wall, watching quietly. He could see it now, tiny cracks forming in Karen's facade. The confident, smug attitude was slipping. Every second she spent sitting on that bench chipped away at the illusion she had built for herself. She looked around the room, scanning the officers working quietly at their desks, none of them paying her any mind. For someone like Karen, used to being the center of attention, this indifference was worse than any argument. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, but the fight was fading from her voice. Daniels glanced over at Marcus, giving him a small nod. "Anything else I need to know before her husband gets here?" "No, sir," Marcus replied. "Everything's documented." Karen shot him a glare, her voice rising again. "You better hope your little report saves you. My husband's connected. He'll have your badge by morning." Marcus didn't react. He had learned long ago that the best way to handle people like Karen was to let them talk themselves into exhaustion. Eventually, the words would run out, and all that would be left was the truth. As if on cue, the front door of the station swung open, and a man in a tailored suit stormed in. Paul Miller, Karen's husband, walked with the kind of arrogance that came from years of believing the rules didn't apply to him. His cold, sharp eyes scanned the room until they landed on his wife. "Karen," Paul said, his voice stern but controlled. "What the hell is going on?" Karen's face lit up with relief, as if her knight in shining armor had arrived. "Paul, thank God you're here. This officer harassed me, arrested me for no reason. You need to do something." Paul turned toward Marcus, his expression hardening. "You're the officer who arrested my wife?" Marcus gave him a polite nod. "That's correct, Officer Reed. Your wife was stopped for a traffic violation, and she resisted lawful instructions." Paul scoffed, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Marcus remained calm. "Sir, everything was handled according to protocol. Your wife refused to cooperate, and she's being processed accordingly." Karen stood up from the bench, her hands still cuffed behind her. "Paul, tell him. They can't do this to me." Paul gave her a sharp look, silencing her with a subtle gesture. It was clear that while Karen was used to getting her way, Paul was the one who pulled the real strings. Daniel stepped forward, his expression neutral but firm. "Mr. Miller, your wife is being booked for obstruction and resisting arrest. Everything has been documented, and we've followed standard procedure." Paul's jaw tightened. "This is a joke. I'll be making a few calls. Believe me, this won't end well for any of you." Marcus met Paul's gaze steadily. "You're welcome to pursue whatever legal actions you see fit. We'll provide all the documentation." Karen shifted uncomfortably on the bench. her earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of reality. The cracks in her act were widening, and Paul's arrival wasn't fixing things as smoothly as she had hoped. "You're all going to regret this," Paul muttered under his breath. "Mark my words." Marcus stayed silent, watching as Daniels finished the booking paperwork. "We're done here, Mr. Miller," Daniels said calmly. "Your wife will be released once the process is complete. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact the department." Paul glared at Marcus one last time, his lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't over." Marcus gave a small, polite nod. "Understood." Paul turned to Karen, who sat quietly now, her anger drained. "Come on," he muttered. "Let's get this over with." Karen stood, her shoulders slumped, the fight completely gone from her. She followed Paul toward the door, glancing back at Marcus one last time. Her expression was a mix of frustration and confusion, as if she couldn't quite understand how things had spiraled so far out of her control. Marcus stood still, his expression calm and steady, as the Millers walked out of the station. The storm had passed, for now. Daniels let out a long breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well," he said quietly, "that could have gone worse." Marcus gave a small nod, though he knew the Millers weren't finished just yet. People like them never let things go without a fight. But for now, he had done his job, by the book, with patience and professionalism. And that, Marcus knew, was all that mattered. Marcus stayed at the station a little longer than planned, going over his reports again and tying up loose ends. Though the Millers had left, the tension from the encounter lingered. It wasn't just the interaction that weighed on him, it was the aftermath he knew was coming. As Marcus walked toward his desk, Officer Sanchez approached with his phone in hand. "Reed," Sanchez said with a knowing smirk, "you're trending." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Trending?" Sanchez turned the phone toward him. There it was. Karen's live stream from the traffic stop had gone viral. Comments and retweets were coming in by the second. Multiple media accounts had picked up the video, adding their own takes and commentary. Textbook Karen behavior. This officer's patience is legendary. She's lucky she wasn't thrown in cuffs sooner. Imagine acting like this, and then live streaming it yourself. Sanchez scrolled further. "Look at this. She thought she was exposing you, but now she's the one getting roasted." Marcus gave a quiet sigh, glancing through the endless stream of comments. Some people were praising his restraint, but others were more focused on tearing Karen apart. "Great," Marcus muttered under his breath. "Now it's a circus." Sanchez chuckled. "Hey, at least they're on your side for once. That's gotta feel good, right?" Marcus gave a small, tired smile. "I guess." But he knew better. Public attention was unpredictable. It could turn supportive one moment and hostile the next. The same people cheering him today might change their tune tomorrow. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him again. "Don't stress about it," Sanchez said, giving him a light pat on the shoulder. "You handled it right, people can see that." Marcus nodded, appreciating the support. But deep down, he knew the real challenge wasn't the crowd or the internet. It was Karen Miller and her husband. They weren't the type to let public humiliation slide without retaliation. Just then, his phone buzzed with a message from Sergeant Daniels. "Meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Legal wants to review the Miller case. Be ready." Marcus let out a slow breath. Of course, the department was bracing for fallout. They always did when incidents like this went viral. It didn't matter how well he had followed protocol. Legal wanted to cover all angles. Sanchez noticed the shift in Marcus's expression. "Everything good?" "Yeah," Marcus replied quietly, pocketing his phone. "Just more meetings." Sanchez gave a sympathetic nod. "Hang in there, man. People see what's real. That's all you can hope for." Marcus appreciated the words, but he knew better than to rely on public opinion. The truth might be on his side, but truth didn't always win when people with power got involved. He glanced back at Sanchez's phone one last time, watching the numbers climb. Thousands of views, endless comments, and articles dissecting every second of the encounter. "This is only the beginning," Marcus said quietly, half to himself. Sanchez gave him a puzzled look, but Marcus didn't elaborate. He had seen too many situations like this turn ugly, even when the facts were clear. Karen and Paul Miller wouldn't just let this go, and Marcus knew they had the resources to keep the fight going. Later that evening, Marcus sat at home on his couch, scrolling through his phone while the news buzzed softly on the TV in the background. Cassandra, his wife, sat beside him, reading something on her tablet. "You okay?" she asked, glancing over at him. Marcus gave a small nod. "Yeah, just tired." Cassandra set the tablet aside, resting her hand gently on his knee. "I saw the video," she said softly. "You handled it well." Marcus let out a quiet chuckle. "Well enough to go viral." Cassandra smiled. "That's not a bad thing. People are seeing the truth. They know you did the right thing." Marcus gave her hand a squeeze, appreciating her steady support. But the knot of unease in his chest hadn't loosened. Public support was good for now, but Karen's husband wasn't just going to let things end here. "They're not done with me," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Cassandra. His wife gave him a sympathetic look, brushing her hand across his arm. "You can only control what's in front of you," she said. "You've done everything right. Let the rest work itself out." Marcus leaned back into the couch, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. Cassandra's words made sense, but experience told him that doing the right thing didn't always protect you from the consequences. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Daniels. "Millers are threatening legal action. Be prepared." Marcus sighed. "Here we go." Cassandra glanced at the text but didn't react, keeping her voice calm and steady. "They're trying to scare you, but they don't have a case." Marcus knew she was right. The facts were on his side, but knowing that didn't make the looming fight any easier. "Just be careful," Cassandra said softly. "These people, they fight dirty when they feel cornered." Marcus nodded, taking her hand in his. "I will." He put the phone down on the coffee table, finally letting go of the tension he'd been holding all day. Whatever came next, he would face it, just like he always did. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the station early, dressed sharp and prepared. His meeting with the legal team was scheduled for 9 a.m., but he knew better than to show up unprepared. The Millers weren't just angry, they were connected. And connected people tended to make life difficult no matter how right you were. Sergeant Daniels was already waiting outside the meeting room, holding a folder thick with paperwork. He gave Marcus a small nod as he approached. "Reed, you ready for this?" Marcus shrugged lightly. "As ready as I'll ever be." Daniels gave a quiet chuckle. "Don't worry. You followed protocol, and the footage backs you up. They'll try to make noise, but they don't have much to stand on." Marcus appreciated the support, though he knew Daniels couldn't guarantee anything. In situations like these, being right wasn't always enough. Inside the meeting room, two members of the department's legal team sat waiting, their faces calm but serious. They had reviewed incidents like this 100 times before, and they approached each one with the same cold precision. "Officer Reed," one of the lawyers, Ms. Bradley, greeted him as he took a seat. "Thanks for coming in. Let's get straight to it." Marcus nodded, folding his hands on the table as the meeting began. Ms. Bradley flipped through a set of documents, speaking in the measured tone of someone used to dealing with high-stakes cases. "We've reviewed the footage from the traffic stop, as well as your incident report. Everything checks out. There are no violations on your part." Marcus gave a small nod. "That's good to hear." "However," Ms. Bradley continued, "the Millers are threatening to file a civil lawsuit. They're claiming the stop was racially motivated and that you used excessive force." Marcus raised an eyebrow but kept his voice calm. "There was no excessive force. She resisted, and I followed protocol." "We know," Daniels chimed in. "It's all on camera." Ms. Bradley leaned back in her chair, her expression neutral. "Yes, but we need to be clear. Cases like this often get messy. Even with evidence in your favor, public perception can complicate things. The Millers have resources, and they're not afraid to use them. Marcus remained composed. What's our next step? We'll be handling any official legal response, Bradley assured him. Your job is to stay professional and avoid further engagement with the Millers. Let the process play out, and be careful. People like them don't always fight fair. Marcus gave a short nod. He had expected as much. The Millers weren't going to let the public humiliation go unchallenged. They were used to winning, and this time they had lost. At least so far. Daniels tapped his pen against the table. Anything else we should be aware of? Bradley glanced down at her notes. Not for now. We'll handle communication with the Millers' legal team. Just keep doing your job, Officer Reed. You've got nothing to worry about. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that, but the sense of unease lingered. Marcus knew they were trying to reassure him, but he also knew the reality. Lawsuits like this could drag on for months, if not longer. Even when the facts were on your side, the fight could still be exhausting. As Marcus left the meeting room, Daniels fell into step beside him. Don't let them get in your head, the sergeant said. You handled it right, that's all that matters. I know, Marcus replied quietly. But they're not done. Not yet. Daniels gave him a sympathetic look. No, they're not. But we've got your back. The words were comforting, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. Later that day, Marcus headed home, hoping for some peace. Cassandra was waiting for him in the kitchen, a knowing look in her eyes as soon as he walked through the door. How'd the meeting go? She asked, setting 2 mugs of coffee on the counter. About how I expected, Marcus said, sitting down with a sigh. They're threatening a lawsuit, but the department thinks we're in the clear. Cassandra slid a mug toward him, sitting across the table. That's good, right? Marcus nodded slowly, though his expression remained thoughtful. It is, but it's not over. Cassandra gave him a sympathetic smile. People like them hate losing. They'll do everything they can to drag this out. I know, Marcus said quietly, taking a sip of his coffee. And even when the facts are on your side, it doesn't always matter. Cassandra reached across the table, resting her hand on his. Whatever happens, we'll get through it. You've faced worse. Marcus smiled softly. Yeah, I have. The warmth of her hand and the quiet comfort of the moment gave Marcus a brief sense of peace. But deep down, he knew that the storm wasn't over. Not yet. That evening, Marcus's phone buzzed with a new notification. He checked it reluctantly. Another article had been published about the incident, this one more inflammatory than the last. The headline read, Wealthy couple plans legal fight after confrontation with officer goes viral. Marcus scanned the article quickly. It was filled with half-truths and speculation, painting Karen and Paul Miller as victims of an overzealous police force. The narrative was already shifting, and Marcus knew it wouldn't be the last twist. Cassandra glanced at the screen, reading the headline over his shoulder. They're not going to let this go, are they? No, Marcus said quietly. They're not. Cassandra gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. But we won't either. Marcus smiled at her, grateful for her steady presence. Whatever happened next, he knew he wouldn't be facing it alone. As he set the phone down, Marcus took a deep breath, preparing himself for the fight ahead. The Millers might have connections and resources, but Marcus had something stronger. Patience, professionalism, and the quiet certainty that he had done the right thing, and in the end, that would be enough. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the station to find a tense energy lingering in the air. Officers exchanged glances as he walked past, and conversations seemed to hush the moment he entered the room. Something was brewing, and Marcus could feel it in the atmosphere. As he sat at his desk, Sergeant Daniels approached, holding a tablet in one hand and looking more tired than usual. Reed, Daniels said, his tone serious. We've got a problem. Marcus straightened in his chair, bracing himself. What now? Daniels handed him the tablet. Take a look, the Millers have escalated. Marcus scanned the screen. There it was, a headline from a local news site, accompanied by a polished photo of Karen and Paul Miller smiling at a charity event. The article, written with an obvious slant, framed Karen as a victim of racial profiling and police overreach. Local couple accuses officer of harassment in viral traffic stop incident. The story twisted the events of the traffic stop, focusing on Karen's version of events while downplaying the video evidence. The Millers had painted Marcus as an officer with a vendetta, using his position to target an innocent woman. The narrative was slick, carefully crafted to generate outrage and sympathy. Marcus scrolled down, his jaw tightening as he read Paul Miller's statement. "We're pursuing all legal avenues to ensure this kind of abuse doesn't happen to anyone else. My wife and I stand against this injustice, and we won't stop until accountability is served." Marcus set the tablet down, exhaling slowly. "They're going all in." Daniels gave a grim nod. "They've got friends in high places, Reed. It's not just about the lawsuit anymore. They're trying to ruin you." Marcus ran a hand down his face, thinking through the implications. He had followed every protocol, stayed calm, and acted professionally. But facts didn't always matter in cases like this. Public perception was often more powerful than the truth. "We've got your back," Daniels said firmly, "but it's going to get rough. Legal is working on a response, but the media isn't always kind when things like this blow up." Marcus gave a small nod. "I figured this was coming." Daniels sat on the edge of the desk, lowering his voice. "Look, I know you're doing everything right, but these people, they played dirty. Be careful." By mid-morning, the news cycle had picked up speed. Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications, more articles, more tweets, more noise. The Millers were working every angle they could, and the public was starting to take sides. Some people defended Marcus, praising his professionalism during the stop. Others, however, latched onto the Millers' narrative, demanding investigations and accountability. "How many times have we seen this before?" one tweet read. "Karen or not, no one deserves to be treated like this by the police," said another. Marcus scrolled through the flood of comments, feeling the familiar weight of public scrutiny. No matter how well he had handled the situation, there would always be people who assumed the worst. His phone buzzed again. A text from Cassandra. "I saw the news. You okay?" Marcus typed a quick response. "Yeah, just more of the same." Her reply came almost immediately. "I know you'll get through this, just stay strong." Marcus smiled faintly, grateful for her unwavering support, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The Millers weren't just trying to win a legal fight. They were trying to destroy his reputation, and reputations once tarnished were hard to restore. By lunchtime, Marcus sat with Officer Sanchez at a small table in the break room. Sanchez scrolled through his phone, shaking his head as he read the latest updates. "These people are relentless," Sanchez muttered. "They're everywhere. Interviews, articles, even TV segments. It's like they've declared war." Marcus stirred his coffee quietly, his expression calm but thoughtful. "They have more to lose than I do. That's why they're pushing so hard." Sanchez glanced up, frowning. "What do you mean?" "They built their life on status and control," Marcus explained. "This incident makes them look weak, so they're fighting to save face." Sanchez gave a low whistle. "You're handling this better than most people would. If it were me, I'd have lost it by now." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's the thing with people like the Millers. They want you to lose it. They push and push, hoping you'll make a mistake." Sanchez shook his head, still scrolling. "Well, it's not working. Everyone who watches the video can see you kept your cool." Marcus appreciated the sentiment, but he knew it wasn't that simple. Public perception was fickle. Even with evidence on his side, the Millers had the power to muddy the waters. Later that afternoon, Marcus received an email from the department's legal team. Attached was a carefully crafted statement, designed to counter the Millers' accusations without inflaming the situation further. "We are confident that Officer Reed's actions during the traffic stop were in accordance with department policy and protocol. The department remains committed to transparency and accountability and will cooperate fully with any further inquiries. Marcus read the statement twice, his jaw tightening. It was a polite, professional response, but it didn't feel like enough. The Millers were attacking his character, and this neutral statement felt more like a shield than a sword. Daniels dropped by his desk again, glancing at the statement over Marcus's shoulder. "They're playing it safe," Daniels said, trying not to stir the pot. "I get it," Marcus replied quietly. "But it's frustrating." Daniels gave him a sympathetic nod. "It always is, but the truth will come out. It always does." Marcus hoped Daniels was right, but deep down, he knew the fight was far from over. The Millers had the connections, the resources, and the platform to keep this going for as long as they wanted, and they wouldn't stop until they had made Marcus pay for bruising their ego. That evening, Marcus sat at home with Cassandra, trying to unwind. But the buzz of notifications and news updates never really stopped. Cassandra noticed the tension in his shoulders and rested her hand gently on his arm. "You've done everything right," she said softly. "Don't let them make you doubt that." Marcus gave her a tired smile. "I know, it's just exhausting." Cassandra leaned in, brushing a soft kiss against his cheek. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Marcus squeezed her hand, grateful for the calm she brought to his chaotic world. "Thanks," he murmured. He leaned back on the couch, taking a deep breath. The storm might still be raging, but Marcus knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let the Millers break him. Whatever they threw at him next, he'd face it head-on, just like always. The following day started like any other. Marcus walked into the station early, greeted by the usual buzz of radios and paperwork shuffling. But the tense air from the day before had lifted slightly, replaced by a subtle, cautious optimism. Something had shifted. Sergeant Daniels waved Marcus over as soon as he entered. "Reed," Daniels called, holding his phone with a satisfied grin. "You're gonna want to see this." Marcus crossed the room and leaned against Daniels's desk. Daniels handed him the phone, and Marcus's eyes widened as he saw the screen. A video clip from Karen's original live stream, now reposted and dissected by several independent news sites and influencers. One popular post read, "The internet has spoken." Karen tried to frame an officer, but it backfired spectacularly. Marcus tapped play, watching as the familiar scene unfolded. The video captured Karen's tantrum in perfect clarity, her taunts, her refusal to cooperate, and her weak shove that she tried to frame as police brutality. The commentary in the reposts was brutal. She literally live-streamed her own downfall. How do you mess up this badly? He stayed calm while she spiraled. Textbook patience. People like her are the reason we don't trust every accusation without proof. Marcus scrolled through the comments, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Public perception, it seemed, had finally landed on the side of truth. Daniels crossed his arms, his grin widening. "Looks like people are waking up." Marcus handed the phone back. "Guess it's not just me they're holding accountable." Daniels chuckled. "Yeah, well, the internet doesn't miss much. Her little performance, it's been memed to death." Marcus smirked. Bet that wasn't part of her plan. By mid-morning, the story had spread like wildfire. News outlets that had originally reported the Millers' narrative were now backpedaling, updating their headlines to reflect the shift in public opinion. New footage shows Karen Miller escalating traffic stop drama. Police officer praised for calm handling of difficult stop. The Millers had gone all in with their accusations, but the tide was turning against them. Karen's meltdown, originally intended to paint her as the victim, was now being ridiculed as a textbook example of entitlement gone wrong. Daniels walked by Marcus's desk, dropping a folded newspaper in front of him. "Looks like you made the headlines again." Marcus picked it up and scanned the front page. The article wasn't glowing praise, but it was balanced, highlighting how the original narrative had been distorted and how the video footage backed up Marcus's actions. "They'll have a harder time making this stick now," Daniels said. Their lawyers already backed off from some of the more aggressive claims. Marcus nodded. Let's hope they back off completely. That afternoon, Marcus received a call from the legal team. Ms. Bradley's voice was calm but pleased. Officer Reed, we've just been informed that the Millers are dropping the civil lawsuit. Their lawyer cited irreparable public backlash as the reason. Marcus raised an eyebrow. So it's over? For now, Bradley replied. They might still file a formal complaint with the department, but given the video evidence, it's unlikely to go anywhere. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the weight on his chest finally beginning to lift. Thanks for the update. You handled this well, Officer Reed, Bradley added. Not every officer would have kept their cool the way you did. Marcus gave a small smile. Just doing my job. As the day wound down, Marcus sat in the break room, savoring the rare sense of peace that had settled over him. Sanchez walked in, his grin wide as he tossed his phone on the table. Man, you've become a legend, Marcus chuckled. Let's not get carried away. Sanchez shook his head, scrolling through his phone. Seriously, there are people making TikToks about you. Someone even called you the Calm King. Marcus rolled his eyes, amused but ready for the whole ordeal to be over. Great. Just what I always wanted. Sanchez leaned back, grinning. Hey, if anyone deserves it, it's you. Marcus appreciated the sentiment, but he knew better than to get too comfortable. The Millers might have lost this battle, but people like them rarely walked away quietly. That evening, Marcus returned home to Cassandra, feeling lighter than he had in days. She met him at the door with a warm smile, wrapping him in a hug that melted the last of his tension. I saw the news, she whispered against his shoulder. Looks like things are finally turning around. Marcus kissed the top of her head. Yeah, for now. Cassandra pulled back, studying his face. You did everything right, Marcus. I hope you know that. Marcus smiled softly. I do, but it's good to hear. They sat down for dinner, the weight of the past few days slowly slipping away. As they ate, Cassandra glanced over at him with a playful grin. So, Calm King, huh? Marcus groaned, shaking his head. Don't you start. Cassandra laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. Well, I think it fits. Marcus rolled his eyes, but his heart felt lighter. For the first time in days, the storm had passed, and peace had returned to his world. Whatever the future held, he knew he was ready for it. He had faced the worst, and come through it stronger. Marcus was back at the station the next morning, wrapping up reports and trying to move past the chaos of the last few days. The Millers' public image was in shambles, and with the lawsuit dropped, Marcus had hoped the ordeal was behind him. But some things he knew didn't end so easily. Just as he was finishing his paperwork, the front doors of the station swung open with a sharp thud. Paul Miller entered, his expression stormy, his eyes locked on Marcus. The room fell silent as Miller marched toward the front desk, carrying the same aura of entitlement that had fueled Karen's meltdown. Officer Reed, Miller barked, his voice loud enough to turn heads. I need a word with you, now. Marcus remained seated, calm and steady. He'd been expecting something like this. People like Miller didn't know how to back down gracefully. Sergeant Daniels noticed the confrontation brewing and stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Mr. Miller, Daniels said firmly, placing himself between Marcus and Paul. You need to calm down. Miller glared at Daniels but didn't lower his voice. I'm not leaving until I speak to him. Marcus stood slowly, adjusting his belt and walking toward the front desk. He met Miller's angry gaze without flinching. What can I help you with, Mr. Miller? Paul jabbed a finger in Marcus's direction. You've humiliated my wife. You've dragged my family's name through the mud. Do you have any idea what you've done? Marcus kept his voice level. I followed protocol. Your wife escalated the situation. Everything is on record. Miller's face twisted with rage. Don't give me that protocol nonsense. You targeted her, and now the whole internet is laughing at us. You'll pay for this. Daniel stepped closer, his expression sharp. Mr. Miller, I suggest you leave before this becomes a bigger problem for you. Miller ignored him, his glare still fixed on Marcus. "You might have won the public over with your little performance, but I'm not done. I'll make sure you never wear that badge again." Marcus stayed calm, even as Miller's threats echoed through the room. "Do whatever you need to, Mr. Miller. I'm not afraid of the truth." Miller's lip curled into a sneer. "You'll regret this." Daniels folded his arms. "This conversation is over. Leave, or we'll escort you out." Paul opened his mouth to argue, but the weight of the room pressed on him. Officers were watching from their desks, and even Miller could sense that he was outnumbered. With one last venomous glare, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the station. Daniels let out a quiet sigh, glancing at Marcus. "You okay?" Marcus gave a small nod. "I figured he'd show up eventually." Daniels shook his head, muttering under his breath. People like him don't know when to quit. The rest of the day passed quietly, but Marcus knew that the encounter with Miller was just the beginning of the final act. The Millers might have lost the battle in the public eye, but their bruised pride was a dangerous thing. Later that evening, Marcus sat on his porch, the cool night air washing over him. Cassandra joined him, sitting beside him with 2 mugs of tea. "How was your day?" she asked softly. Marcus gave her a small smile. Miller showed up at the station, made some more threats. Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "What did he say?" "The usual," Marcus replied with a shrug. "That I'll pay for what I did. That he'll make sure I lose my badge." Cassandra gave him a long, thoughtful look. "And what do you think?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring out at the quiet street. "I think people like him are dangerous when they feel powerless. But I've done everything by the book. He can try all he wants. I'm not going to break." Cassandra reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You're stronger than they are." Marcus smiled at her, grateful for the steady support she always provided. "I hope you're right." "I know I am," she said softly. They sat together in comfortable silence, the night stretching out peacefully around them. For the first time in days, Marcus allowed himself to relax, knowing that no matter what came next, he was ready. The next morning, Marcus checked his phone and saw an update from the department's legal team. Complaint officially dismissed. No further action required. He exhaled slowly, a quiet sense of relief settling over him. It was over. Finally. Truly over. He forwarded the message to Cassandra, who responded with a simple but supportive text. "Told you." Marcus smiled as he pocketed his phone. The Millers had tried everything: legal threats, public smear campaigns, personal confrontations, but in the end they had lost. Not because Marcus fought back, but because he had stayed calm and let the truth speak for itself. He stood tall, ready to move forward. The storm had passed, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt bright. The morning felt lighter as Marcus walked into the station, the weight of the past few days finally lifting from his shoulders. The Millers' complaints had been dismissed, the lawsuit abandoned, and the media frenzy had shifted its attention elsewhere. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus could breathe freely. He made his way to his desk, nodding at a few officers along the way. Officer Sanchez grinned as Marcus sat down. "Hey, man," Sanchez said, spinning his chair around. "Saw the news. Officially in the clear, huh?" Marcus gave a small, relieved smile. "Yeah, no more complaints, no more lawsuits." Sanchez slapped Marcus's shoulder playfully. "Good, you deserve some peace after all that." He chuckled. "Although I gotta admit, it was kind of fun watching Karen dig her own grave online." Marcus shook his head with a wry smile. "Yeah, well, I'm just glad it's over." Sergeant Daniels walked by, catching the tail end of their conversation. "Good job, Reed," he said, giving Marcus an approving nod. "You handled it well. Not everyone would have stayed that calm." Marcus gave a polite nod. "Thanks, Sarge, just doing my job." Daniels gave him a knowing look. "Not every job is done that smoothly, Reed. You kept your cool when a lot of people would have snapped. That counts for something." Marcus appreciated the words, though he wasn't one to dwell on praise. He had simply done what needed to be done. And that, to him, was enough. As the morning wore on, Marcus decided to clear his head with a quick walk. He stepped out of the station into the crisp autumn air, the breeze carrying with it a sense of renewal. The chaos of the past week was behind him, and he felt ready to move forward. He strolled down the street, the rhythmic sound of his boots on the pavement grounding him. People passed by without giving him a second glance, and for once, Marcus appreciated the anonymity. He didn't want to be a viral sensation or a trending topic. He just wanted to be a cop doing his job. A few blocks down, he found a small coffee shop and stepped inside. As he waited for his order, a woman in line ahead of him glanced over, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Hey," she said, a bit hesitant. "You're that officer from the video, right? The one with the traffic stop?" Marcus gave a polite nod. "Yeah, that's me." The woman smiled warmly. "I just wanted to say, you handled that really well. It couldn't have been easy." Marcus gave a small, appreciative smile. "Thanks, I just did what I had to." The woman nodded, then added, "Not everyone can stay that calm under pressure." People noticed. It made a difference. Marcus accepted her words with a quiet nod, grateful but ready to leave the attention behind. As he took his coffee and stepped back onto the street, he felt a sense of closure settling in. The encounter with Karen Miller was finally fading into the background, becoming just another part of the job. Later that day, Marcus returned home to Cassandra, who greeted him at the door with her usual warmth. "How was work?" she asked, pulling him in for a hug. "Quiet," Marcus replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "Just the way I like it." Cassandra grinned. "That's good. You deserve some quiet." They sat together on the couch, the weight of the past few days melting away in the comfort of each other's company. Cassandra rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, and for the first time in a while, everything felt normal again. "Any lingering fallout?" Cassandra asked softly. Marcus shook his head. "Nope, it's all over. Legal dropped the complaint and the Millers are out of steam." Cassandra gave a satisfied nod. "Good. Maybe now they'll learn something." Marcus chuckled softly. "I wouldn't count on that." Cassandra smiled. "Well, even if they didn't, you came out on top. That's what matters." Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. "Yeah, I guess it is." They sat in peaceful silence, the sounds of the outside world fading into the background. For the first time in days, Marcus felt fully at ease. No more looming threats, no more confrontations. Just peace. As the sun set outside their window, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. The Millers had tried to ruin him, but in the end, they had only exposed themselves. Marcus hadn't needed to fight back. He had simply stayed true to himself, and that had been enough. People like Karen and Paul Miller thrived on control, but when that control slipped, they crumbled. And Marcus knew that was the real victory. Not just winning the public's favor, but staying grounded in the truth. He gave Cassandra's hand a gentle squeeze. "Thanks for sticking with me through all this." Cassandra smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Always." And with that, the last remnants of tension dissolved, leaving only the quiet comfort of the present moment. The storm had passed, and Marcus was ready for whatever came next. A week later, life had finally returned to normal. The buzz around the incident had faded, the media frenzy replaced by the next viral story, and the Millers had disappeared from public view. The videos, once trending, were now just archived moments in the endless scroll of the internet. Marcus sat at his desk in the station, finishing the last bit of paperwork related to the incident. The final closure felt good, like the end of a long chapter he was ready to close for good. Sergeant Daniels walked by, giving Marcus a nod. "Hey, Reed, got a minute?" Marcus stood and followed Daniels to his office. Inside, Daniels leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus for a moment before speaking. "Just wanted to say, officially, good job handling that mess with the Millers," Daniels said. "Not many people could have kept their cool like you did." Marcus smiled faintly. "Thanks, Sarge." Daniels gave a small chuckle. You've set the bar high, Reed. I hope you know that. Marcus shook his head with a grin. I was just doing my job. Daniels leaned forward, his tone softening. It's more than that. It's how you did it. Staying calm, professional. That kind of example matters. Marcus appreciated the words, though he didn't dwell on praise. He had done what he was trained to do, but knowing it had made a difference felt good. Daniels stood, giving Marcus a firm handshake. Take the weekend off, Reed. You've earned it. Marcus nodded gratefully. Will do, Sarge. That evening, Marcus sat with Cassandra on their back porch, enjoying the quiet of the night. A gentle breeze drifted through the trees and the stars dotted the sky like tiny, distant lanterns. How does it feel now that it's all over? Cassandra asked, sipping her tea. Marcus exhaled slowly, letting the peace of the moment settle over him. Feels good, he said softly, like a weight's finally lifted. Cassandra smiled warmly. I knew you'd make it through. Marcus gave her a playful nudge. You always know. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the night filling the space between them. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt truly at ease. No more looming threats, no more pressure, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done the right thing. Think they'll come back? Cassandra asked, her tone light but curious. Marcus shook his head. I doubt it. People like the Millers only fight when they think they can win. They've lost this one. Cassandra smiled. Good. They picked the wrong person to mess with. Marcus chuckled. Yeah, I think they figured that out. They sat quietly for a while longer, watching the stars and enjoying the stillness. Marcus knew the world would keep turning and new challenges would come, but he was ready. He had faced the storm and come out stronger, knowing that the truth had prevailed. As the night deepened, Cassandra rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, and he felt a sense of contentment he hadn't experienced in days. Life would go on, and so would he, steady, grounded, and unshaken. Marcus gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Thanks for being with me through all this. Cassandra smiled softly. Always. And with that, the last of the tension faded into the night. The Millers were behind him, the storm had passed, and Marcus was ready for whatever came next. He leaned back, letting the quiet embrace him, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same calm resolve that had carried him through the hardest of moments. Because in the end, staying true to yourself was the only fight that ever really mattered. Enjoyed the story? Hit like, subscribe, and share it with friends. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories. Stay tuned. Our next video is coming soon.